The main question that we want to ask, what we want to answer now is, what do AI and ISO 27032 have in common? And I know that maybe this is not the well-known standard like others, like the 9001 and the 14000 or the 27001, but that does not necessarily make it less important. So today I bring you some insights about the standard. It's mainly based on my participation as an expert on ISO's SC27 committee. This is where experts share ideas, comments, views, and also the voting of the new publication of the standards. I was appointed by Argentina to the ISO 27032 working group, where the standard has suffered major changes. So it was a little bit outdated. The last version was from 2012, that was 11 years ago. And the new version was published just last month, so June 2023, and we're going to talk about this new standard. So there are differences within the scope of the two standards, the 2012 version and the 2023, on the objectives and also on the controls that are more related to the risk, also to cover the risk that Aiken mentioned about deep fakes, fake news, and what could possibly happen or what could possibly go wrong with AI. So what are we going to discuss here is going to be a brief intro to the new standard. We're going to compare it against the ISO 27001. So there is, of course, a reference mapping between these two standards because they are really coming common and aligned. And also we are compare against the previous version, the 2012 version, so to see what's new in the standard. So to start a little bit, the title of the standard is Cybersecurity Guidelines for Internet Security. So you see that the scope is the guidelines, but for a niche of information security that is internet security. So a subset of cybersecurity. So we are focusing only on internet security. Than the previous version was focusing most on cybersecurity as a broad. So here we focus only on internet security. That's a portion of cybersecurity. And the main idea is to focus on addressing internet security issues and common threats that could be, for instance, social engineering attacks, zero-day attacks, privacy attacks, hacking, maybe proliferation of malware, and so on. And also to focus on the preservation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and other properties that could be, for instance, authenticity, accountability, non-repudiation, and reliability. All those properties that are always mentioned on ISO 27001 and all the ISOs related to that. So those are the main properties we want to protect here. It also provides technical and non-technical controls to address internet security risks, including controls for preparing for attacks, preventing attacks, detecting and monitoring attacks, and also responding to attacks. So this gives you an idea of the 5 areas also related to NIST CSF. So the identify, protect, monitoring, respond, and recover. So there are controls for all those areas within the new version of the standard. That's an improvement from the other one. Also, it provides guidance for internet security governance. So what are the policies, what are the roles, the responsibilities, information flows, not only within an organization. This is more focused on the environment, on how the different users on the internet collaborate with each other, how are the information security vulnerabilities from one benefit or not generate a vulnerability for others, also on the ecosystem as a whole. So see it as the ecosystem, not only on an organization alone. So it also combines several international standards and uses existing concepts from 27001, 02, 27033, that's the network security, and 27701, that's the one related to privacy information management systems, so also strongly related to the 27001. So the main idea here is to provide a relationship between internet security, web security, network security, and cybersecurity. Obviously, focus on internet security. So giving controls for that, addressing cybersecurity readiness also, but for internet-facing systems. So we're focusing on there. Also identifying interesting parties and describing the roles within internet security. Okay, perfect. So here, this is a section of the standard, it's a diagram that is within the standard. The idea is to define what are the main things that the standard is talking about. So cybersecurity, we have the definition there, but the main idea is to manage information security risks when the information is in a digital form. So we are only focusing when it is a digital form. in computers, storage, or networks, and so on. It also deals with protected internet connecting systems, could be hardware, software, programs, and data from potential attacks. And mostly threats can be internet-based or due to connectivity to other network systems within the organization or a customer or provider's network. So C of these more focusing on attacks coming from the internet or connected or connections to the internet. And then we go to internet security. Here is the preservation of the CIA of information over the internet. And also all the properties we talked before, authenticity, accountability, non-repudiation, and reliability. Also, if you need a little bit more information on the definition of this, you can go to the ISO 27000 with the definitions. Then it also talks about internet security being concerned with protected internet-related services and related ICT systems and networks as an extension of network security. So it also focuses apart, as you see on the diagram, as a part of the network securities. So it concerns all web security and it concerns part of network security, not as a whole. Because if we go to the definition of network security, we see that it covers all kind of networks that exist in an organization, could be from local area networks, WANs, personal area networks, and wireless networks. So it goes a little beyond the scope of the standard. It's only internet security. So this is only to have a little bit in mind of what are we talking about, what are the definitions, and so on. So going forward, and also in one of the clauses, clause 7, there is a mention and a listing, a detail of the interested parties. And the main thing here, the main objective of what we want to communicate is that there is a complexity that arises here from the fact that all interested parties, even when they are not malicious, have a different view on their needs, on the requirements, and the threats. They're completely different. So they have a different list of risks and controls that they have to counter, no? They have to treat and risk and treat. This means that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So we will have controls here in the standard, but it's up to each organization to see how they implement it, what's the level of risk that they want to address, what's the level of willingness of risk they want to, let's say, accept. So that's the main objective here and what the ISO standard wants to communicate. So we have different interested parties. We have the users, that could be organizations, public or private, could be any individual that have access to the internet or any services available on the internet. Like, for example, a buyer or a seller or a content contributor, a gamer, a web surfer, and so on. The important here is that organizations must extend their corporate responsibilities to the internet. So they should proactively ensure that the practices and actions in the internet do not introduce further security risks to other internet users communities. That's why we're talking about the ecosystem and not just a user or just an organization that, for instance, ISO 27001 would look out. On this standard 27032 goes more for the ecosystem of what's going on there, what the interactions, and so on. Then we have other interested parties, could be the coordinator and standardization organizations. For instance, ICANN, IATF, and W3C, they develop technical standards on the use of the internet and the service providers, and the services provided by service providers. So they're more of having technical approaches of how should things be done, guidelines, and so on. And then we have the government authorities. And these are really important because they hold information not only on national security, maybe military, intelligence, but also a lot of information of individuals and organizations and society as a whole. So, and that's one of the main roles of government, but they also have another role that they need to protect their own country's infrastructure and information, and not only their own country, but if you look at the EU, it's also other member states that join together and try to protect their own shared infrastructure. And they also play a role in the coordination between law enforcement agencies when an incident happens. They are the primary coordinator for disseminating information when, in times of crisis, when some security incident or there's a cyber attack, mainly to the nation or to an important organization or important sector of the nation. It also includes authorities like CERTs that are mainly sometimes also within government organizations. And they also mandate an important part of the education program for universities and high schools that have let's say the ability of forming the next cybersecurity profession. So they have a really important role in the ecosystem as a whole. Then we also have the law enforcement agencies that enforce the regulations and hold all interested parties accountable, or those regulations also performed by the government. Then the ISPs, the internet service providers that provides access to the internet for employees, partners, users, and so on. And then we have to ask the question if it's legally or not, if they have if they have the authorizations, could the ISP warn their customers when they discover threat patterns? Do they have the ability to do that? Can they legally do that? Applying to regulations? Can we set an agreement to do that? And so on. Could they look for dangerous transfers over the internet and give the tip to the users, governments, or law enforcement agencies? That's another question that we have there for those interesting parties. Okay. So also going to another section of the standard, it talks a lot about internet security risk assessment and treatment. That's clause 8 of the standard. And this is essential because we need to identify potential risk early on, and not only for other risks, but also focusing on AI and developing appropriate treatment strategies for risk and AI, what AI systems connect to the internet. If they are not connected to the internet, other things could also go wrong and related and so on, but mainly focusing on the internet connected ones. So this relies on ISO 31000 and ISO 27005. The other one more focused on information security risk, the last one. And here we need to address risk management in the context of the internet. Remember that we are talking about internet security. And it's the responsibility of the interested parties to do it, to define their approach for risk management, what is the risk appetite, what are the controls they want to implement. But it's not only an individual responsibility, because there's also a shared one, to achieve a coherent level of security of the ecosystem as a whole. So in that case, we need to consider the relevant threats and the relevant vulnerabilities, as we see in the slide, that could be linked with internet security issues, so that we can select controls based on our limited resources, based on limited resources of each interested party, and to also increase the maturity not only of each interested party, but also of the ecosystem as a whole. Then we need to understand who are the threat actors, who are the threat agents, those individuals or group of individuals that could have any role on the execution or support of an attack. And why is this important? Because by understanding their motives, could be religious, political, economic, what capabilities they have, knowledge, funding, size, what are their intentions? Do they want to also only have fun? Do they want to commit a crime? Do they want to commit espionage on their target? This is critical for the assessment of the risk and in the development of the implementation of the controls, because we're not going to treat a threat that is a nation state the same as a hacktivist or as a malicious insider and so on. And here I'm not only talking about threats to personal identifying information, but also deliberate modification of proprietary information, but mainly threats to the infrastructure that supports things. So a little bit more important or critical and related to that. Also to the creation of fake information, hoaxes at a large scale, and even those kind of threats of attacks that could be perpetrated by advanced persistent threats. So we are trying to level up a little bit more on the standard and on the focus of the standard. Okay, so we also talk about vulnerabilities, zero-day vulnerabilities, deployment of patches, and so on. But another important thing is the attack vector. So what's an attack vector? It's a path or a means by which an attacker can gain access to a computer or a network server. So we're talking about gaining access in an unauthorized way within the internet security scope, no? An attack can occur on a singular attack vector or carried out as a blended attack, using various attack vectors. Some examples of this attack vector could be suspicious websites, zero-day exploitation, maybe peer-to-peer applications, and also IoT devices could act as an additional attack vector. And the attacker does not always use the same attack vector. That's the main thing here. It uses multiple vectors and changes them frequently. So we need to be sure of what's going on there in order to assess the risk mainly. And in order to, maybe they're going to be using different tactics, techniques, and procedures to attack AI systems connecting to their internet than other type of systems. Okay, perfect. So comparing the ISO 27032 against the ISO 27001, the audience is totally different. The 27032 is more overarching, not only focusing on organizations or the group of companies or only their supply chain. It's talking about the whole ecosystem. The whole ecosystem is a target here. Then the objectives are different. This is not for certification or increasing the maturity of the internal information security, but more for fostering maturity of internet security, knowledge of interested parties, some ways we can increase security of the ecosystem as a whole, and so on. So also the scope is different. This is not information security. This is a subset of information security. We're talking about internet security. And also the type of frameworks. Mostly related, both could be considered program frameworks, although the new version of the 2732 has less mappings and technical reference that is predecessor. So that's another thing we are going to talk about. Okay, perfect. So in a comparison, 27.32 version 2023 against 2012, the previous version more than 10 years ago. So the main thing here is that there is a less focus on the cybersecurity space. The scope has been decreased to internet security. The sections describing the nature of cyberspace, the nature of cybersecurity have been taken out. Also, there's less focus on collaboration. The previous version offered a framework for information sharing, coordination, incident handling, processes for collaboration, information exchange, sharing, and so on. But these key elements can be taken out of the standard. Also, we talk about the scopes reduction. There's also an enhancement in the interested parties. We're going to talk a little bit more on another slide, so that has been improved. And also some improved recommendations on the control section. We're going to talk about also on another slide, but the controls were really reduced, and now they have been increased and more than double and triple the amount of controls. Okay, perfect. So going to each of the differences, we have here the title is totally different. In the previous version, it was information technology, security techniques. Now we go to guidelines for internet security. So that's the main of the title. Then for the definition of cybersecurity here, see that they talk about cyberspace in the previous version. Here they're going more for addressing cyber risks, although there's a notion of only on the digital form, as you see on the second sentence of the 2023 version. So we're still talking about cybersecurity, but more going on the internet security side, on the digital part side. Okay, perfect. So on the scope, what are the main differences? See on the left-hand side, in the 2012 version, there was a mention of critical information infrastructure protection being in scope. Here on the new version, we have mentioned that this document does not specifically address these controls for system, and that's the main idea. But it can be used, but it not particularly addresses. That's the main difference on the scope from the previous to the other one. Also, the guidance on improving the state of cybersecurity, and here is the guidance for internet security, as we already described. Then, this is one of the main changes. So the same graph was included in both versions. We see that cybersecurity is just on the left side. It's just a small part. Here, cybersecurity has been enlarged as it covers everything: internet security, network security, and web security, and so on. Then information security is not mentioned here. Critical information infrastructure protection also, and so on. As you see, the main difference there. So we are focusing on internet security being as part of cybersecurity. That's I think that one of the main changes here on the scope and how they establish the definition of the different sections. Good. Then the interesting part is there were only 2 on the previous version. Now we have 5, as we saw and we described earlier. So that's the main change here. They were denominated stakeholders before. Now they are denominated as interesting parties. Then related to the controls, there were 6 controls before. Here we have them. And see that they are not mostly focused on the 5 functions that we described before. Now, yes, we have 17 controls, and they're more focusing on not only preventing something from happening, but also detecting and recovering and respond to that. So see the main philosophical difference and the approach on the controls that are being implemented. Okay, so to talk a little bit more about how we can address Gen AI risks with ISO 27032. We have 17 controls. That's up to the organization to see how to implement them, what's the risk appetite, and so on. But as we see, we can divide this into 2 main things: the protection and identification, but on the technical and on the GRC side, the governance, risk, and compliance, not the non-technical side. No? And here we can mention the important ones of the controls, that is awareness and training, This can help in recognizing and mitigating the potential risks associated with generative AI. Also, incident response is essential in the event of a cybersecurity breach caused by a generative AI-based attack or being a Gen AI system being attacked. And the planning before it happens, we need to know what to do. So in case of an incident, so it's going to be different if we have a Gen AI attack. It's going to be more challenging to address this. Are we going to have a specific playbook for that? How are we going to detect that, and so on. Then to address legislations related to the EU AI Act that Kristen mentioned before, also privacy protection of PAI being processed or not, or being attacked by AI, and then asset management to assess if any sensitive data is being processed or used by AI. And then we have on the right another set of controls that are more to going to the detect, recover, and respond. I know this is oversimplification of the controls. There's not much time to talk about all of them, but we see there is the 5 functions being addressed. One could also make the question that maybe there's an imbalance between the 5 functions, but that's a thing that each organization has to address on its own. And mainly because of that, I think we need to combine the ISO 27032 with other frameworks. So I don't think the answer is only focusing on the ISO 27032. It could be, let's say, the cornerstone. It could be the main launching of our approach for Gen AI risks, but we also have to complement with other frameworks. That's why we need to take an overarching approach. That's why we need an interdisciplinary approach also and collaborate with other interesting parties. So we need to assess the Gen AI impact on cybersecurity. Each organization will assess the risk in consideration to the threats they have and their own assets and their own threat landscape, and also the ecosystem they're in and the maturity of it. This will lead to the selection of controls that will help them reduce to an acceptable level and increase the ecosystem maturity, but it's more of an individual but also ecosystem approach. Good, perfect. And then we need to, as I mentioned, combine several frameworks, combine several best practices, and that's why I brought you on the next slide PwC's responsible AI framework. And from here, I'm not saying we have to implement every single framework or standard, but by implementing ISO 27032 and combining the implementation with some of PwC's framework, for instance, the part of data and AI ethics, or the interpretability and explainability, the sustainability, also the bias and the fairness that are not directly addressed on ISO 27032, we can have a complete and overarching approach to cyber AI risks. Also on the safety for physical kind of systems, AI systems that have access to physical, let's say, mechanisms or parts. And then I think one of the important things is the problem formulation. So does this problem warrant an AI or an ML solution because of the hype that AI is having and so on? That's another important thing of this framework. And the validation, no? The continuous improvement based on the feedback. Okay. And then also, Kirsten talked a lot about the EU AI Act, but the main thing that I want you to communicate is not only based on ISO, take ISO as the main step to launch your cyber Gen AI cyber risk management framework, combine it with other frameworks, but also take into consideration legislation. And we know it is in a draft format, this EU AI Act, but also take into consideration data. Do a risk assessment of your AI systems, of you're gonna plan to purchase something related to the system and so on, to take a whole holistic view of this. Okay, and that's all what I wanted to mention about ISO 27032 and its new version. We have a little bit of time if you want to do any questions via chat and so on. Don't worry if you want to interact.
Yes, okay, thanks a lot, Lucas, Akin, and also Christian for delivering this very informative webinar. Just to remind you that PCB offers training and certification courses, which will show your dedication in managing data protection frameworks and as well as cybersecurity. And most importantly, you will get recognized worldwide. Now, without further ado, we'll go ahead and answer some of the questions from the attendees. One of the question is, hi, just curious on the ISO 27032 previous version versus the current one. I know that there has been an increase in the number of controls. Are the new controls building off the old controls, or is it a totally new set of controls?
No, they're building up. There are some, let's say, increase in scope of the controls, but they're building up. There are controls that have been taken, have been expanded, have been added more detail. So if you compare the previous version, the extent and the length of the controls, there were a few pages. But if you see on the new version, there's a lot of content. There's a lot of controls and there's a lot of focus on there. So what I think is they can build it up on the controls. They have extended the scope and they have added new things there. So I'm pretty, let's say, good. I think it's a pretty good enhancement and update of the standard. Yes.
Okay, thanks, Lucas. Another question is, any recommendations for a risk assessment process practices to categorize AI systems in compliance with the EU AI Act?
Okay, perfect. I know, Aikin, if you want to intervene also, but I think there are already some frameworks out there, not specifically for the EU AI Act. I think formalized yet because it's in a draft format. They will come. But for instance, we have been working with the NIST AI risk framework that has been published, I think, this year. So there are things coming up. You can look up that. And for sure, there will be something on the EU coming on. But I think mainly we have to wait and see what they come on. Mainly when the EU AI Act is published and not in a draft format, there will be a lot of frameworks. For now, the main one I'm working on is the NIST one that I can recommend.
Okay, we have a question for Akin. Hi, Akin. What controls can we put in place for the risks arising from AI?
So I think, Lucas, can you just help me scroll to the last slide before your presentation? I tried to stress that if we have, am I audible? Lucas,
Sorry?
can you scroll to the last my last slide before your presentation? Yeah.
Of your presentation?
Yes, just page.
Just give me 1 second.
Yeah. Okay, let's repeat 29.
This one.
All right. Yes, thank you very much. If you look through this, the person that asked the question, if you look at the first thing is from the ideation stage, as a cybersecurity expert, we ensure that we don't have to actually finish up the process of creating and developing a full AI skill before you start implementing cybersecurity standards. For example, Lucas mentioned something about the different controls that has been implemented in 2022, from translating from 6 controls to 17 controls. Some of this and most of these controls are still within the IPDR methodology. So if you look at the IPDR methodology, it will still give you an holistic view of securing development stage even before production stage. You don't actually start securing an application, an AI application or whatever enterprise AI at the end of deployment. You start before and then you go through best practices. And just like Lucas mentioned, to you look at the overarching technologies so that you have more than enough frameworks to look through. I was mentioning ELISA, we have the NIST, we have the IHSM framework, which you can actually still work with. But if you look at the industry still determines most of the standards and controls, aside policies and procedures that are used to implement security within the AI application. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Akin. And the last question for today, one of the slide titles, ISO 27032-2023, having diagram shows that information security is part of cybersecurity. My question is for Mr. Lucas. Don't you think that cybersecurity is part of information security? I mean, information security is superset and cybersecurity is subset of it.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I think cybersecurity is a subset of information security. Let me go to the graphs so we can. I think cybersecurity is a subset of information security as it's defined in other ISO standards also and in the definitions. Why mainly cybersecurity is more focused on the digital form, and information security goes not only on the digital form of information but also on the physical. If you have a report that you can touch with your hands, printed paper, a conversation being done in a meeting, or sensitive information on a whiteboard, that's concerned by information security, but not by cybersecurity. And I think that that's correct, what they mentioned. And that's why I think they have done some corrections to the new version of the standard to make it a little more clarifying, to make it more easy. However, they don't mention information security on the new graph, so it can give you a few of the doubts. Yes, and I think it's correct.
Okay, thanks one more time for joining us today, and thanks to everyone that joined us in this webinar. Just be informed that this session is recorded and it will be posted on our website and YouTube channel, along with the slides of the presentation. Thanks to all of you one more time, and hope to have you in future webinars as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.